If there's two things in this world that I like, it's movies and video games. And being the massive Nintendo fan that I am, you would bet that I was jumping with joy when Nintendo announced they were making a Zelda movie. We already got a movie adapting the Mario game series, and now we're getting this? Now, I fancy myself to be quite an enjoyer of the high fantasy genre. However, despite that, the grandest high fantasy franchise out there, Lord of the Rings, has always been a bit much for me. It's freakishly impressive how in detail the world is, but because of how grand it is, they had to overload us with information over the course of 3 movies that are all 3 hours each. I'm not saying that Lord of the Rings is bad, just that I'm not smart enough for it. So, because of that, when I want to get my fix for high fantasy movies, I normally just watch the Dungeons & Dragons movie over and over again. And while Honor Among Thieves is amazing, it's still only one movie. So the idea of taking a high fantasy series as awesome as The Legend of Zelda and making a movie out of it is very exciting for me. However, many people are very pessimistic about this movie, saying things like how it should be animated instead of live action, and how they have no confidence in the people who are working on it. I'm trying to be optimistic about this, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have my own worries. So I figured it would be a good idea to get my thoughts out there, that way maybe we can get everyone on the same page about this movie. Hopefully even Nintendo. Also, making this shit takes fucking forever, so please subscribe. Please, please, please. First up, we have to talk about one major point of contention when it comes to this movie. Link, and whether or not he should talk. Link is famously mute in the games, since him being a silent protagonist helps the player slip into his shoes better. However, the whole silent protagonist rules from the video game medium doesn't apply to movies, quite the opposite. Movies are much more story-centric than video games, and they expect to develop their characters over time, meaning in most movies, almost everyone, especially the main character, needs to do quite a lot of speaking. Yet, in Zelda's case, many argue that having Link talk would be unfaithful to the game that the movie is adapting. This is a large point of debate between fans, but since it's such a critical factor for how the movie will turn out, I'll need to pick a side on this before going any further. So, my decision on whether or not Link should speak is... yes, he should. Why? Because it's happened before, and it worked. The silent protagonist thing is only really a thing in interactive media like video games. This movie isn't Zelda's first time leaving the world of interactive media, and last time Link did so, he had a voice and it worked. And no, I'm not talking about the CDI games or the crappy cartoon series from the 80s, I'm talking about the various different Zelda mangas. There's 8 different series of Zelda mangas, each adapting a different game in the Zelda franchise, and Link talks in all of them. Granted, most of these weren't well received, but there were a few that people seemed to like, most notably, Twilight Princess. Now, I haven't read it, but from what I've heard, people seem to absolutely love the Twilight Princess manga. And the thing about graphic novels and mangas and the like is that from a creative standpoint, they aren't that hard to convert into video. Just take a comic panel, replace the drawing with real life, and have the actors say and do what the illustrations and speech bubbles show us that they're saying and doing. Suddenly, boom, you've turned your comic into a movie. Sure, there's some small things that work in one format but not in the other, but from a visual standpoint, graphic novels and movies are pretty similar. Meaning, if the Zelda Twilight Princess manga works, then as long as the Zelda movie checks off all the boxes that the manga did, then there's no reason that it shouldn't succeed critically. So, since Link talks in the manga, it should be fine if Link talks in the movie as well. So long as they don't butcher his character. Link's still a stoic and courageous swordsman, and just because he isn't literally mute doesn't mean he'll be loud and talkative. But enough about Link, let's talk about the movie itself. There's been a lot of discourse about which Zelda game the movie should adapt. Some say Ocarina of Time, others say Skyward Sword, and others say Breath of the Wild. However, the problem with that is, we've already played all those games. We've seen their stories, and it'd be quite boring to have the movie just be a copy and pasted version of one of the games that we've already played. Granted, Zelda isn't the most story-centric series in the world, meaning if the filmmakers do directly adapt a specific game, there'd be plenty of wiggle room at least. However, that still would be kinda lame, which is why the big consensus is that they shouldn't adapt any Zelda game and make a totally new story. Now, this idea is great on paper, but I don't think it would work either. You see, the way Zelda games always make new stories is by putting new lore elements on the table. Twilight Princess's story built off of the Twilight Realm. Link's Awakening story is built off of being inside the Windfish's dream. The Wind Waker story is built off of how Hyrule was flooded. The Minish Cap has the Picori, the list goes on. The new dimensions or races or settings is what makes new Zelda stories, and these games are able to pull this off because as new entries in the series, it's their job to add new stuff. The movie, however, isn't one of the Zelda series' many sequels, it's an adaptation of the Zelda series. And because of that, it can't suddenly pull out any of these new dimensions, races, or settings, because that stuff wouldn't be Zelda. If the filmmakers dared to make something new, like the game devs did with the Great Sea or the Zonai, or God forbid something like Termina, then they would be eaten alive by critics and fans alike for being unfaithful to the series. But without making new lore like that, what can they do to make a brand new Zelda story? Without the new lore, most Zelda stories usually just boil down to the same basic structure. So what do? If adapting a game is too derivative and making a new story would be too unfaithful to the source material, then how do we make this work? The answer is simple. Instead of adapting one Zelda game, we adapt multiple Zelda games, and combine their stories together, editing some parts out of each story in the process. This would allow the movie to stand out on its own, while still firmly being a Zelda story at its core. For this idea to work, we'd have to pick the games that we're taking story elements from very carefully. This movie is adapting the series as a whole, so it wouldn't be a good idea to use any one-off lore elements from a self-contained Zelda game that has never appeared since. At least, not as a major plot element in the first movie. Since they're so much more recent though, I'll give stuff from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom a pass. Additionally, I'm also giving stuff from Skyward Sword a pass, because unlike the new lore added in Zelda games like Twilight Princess and the Minish Cap, the stuff from Skyward Sword isn't self-contained. Skyward Sword's lore sets up everything that happens in the entire Zelda series, and we're going to want to use that on multiple occasions. So that boils down to the Zelda games we can adapt being NES Zelda, Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. NES Zelda's story is way too basic, so we can eliminate that. Wind Waker's terrain is mainly ocean, which probably won't work well for this since Zelda's traditional imagery is known for its large open fields. Same for Skyward Sword and its setting in the clouds, though the movie should certainly reference the events of Skyward Sword as something that happened ages before the movie took place, and maybe even the cloud setting could be visited in a sequel. Then, while I said that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were exempted from the self-contained lore rule due to recency, I actually feel like Tears of the Kingdom is too recent. With the game that came out recently, adapting its story would feel derivative even if it was mixed with another game's story. Maybe we can still take some ideas from Tears of the Kingdom for the movie though, like giving secret stones to the sages or letting Ganon use bloom magic. That leaves Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past, and Breath of the Wild. I think I'm going to have to cut out Breath of the Wild since I want to make Ganon an actual character, and because the main events of the game are too story heavy, while the story of what happened 100 years ago is actually a bit too well covered to adapt to a movie thanks to Age of Calamity. And with that, it looks like our movie will be a mix between Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time, with Skyward Sword being referenced as past events that took place before this movie, along with some smaller elements from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom sprinkled in. I'll get to how they should work in the actual story in a moment, but first I think we should cover how this movie should handle dungeons. Most Zelda games have Link fighting through anywhere from 5 dungeons to 13 dungeons, in order to obtain a collection of MacGuffins that the player needs to defeat the final boss. Now, there's no way in hell this would work for a Zelda movie. A Zelda TV series, maybe, but a Zelda movie? Forget about it. Dungeon crawling should only be a small portion of the movie. I'd say only a couple dungeons, plus a very short third dungeon right before the final battle. Sure, this wouldn't quite work for collecting full groups of MacGuffins like Link does in the games, but we don't have to have 8 MacGuffins each. Just have it so that they're only hunting for 1 MacGuffin at a time instead of 6 of them, or so that there is multiple of them, but only one of them is inside a dungeon, and the rest are far more easily obtained. Next up, it's time for us to tackle this movie's characters. Keep in mind, I don't really know many actors, so I won't be casting anyone, I'll just be naming faces from the games I think should appear in the movie. Link and Zelda are both obvious ones. Link's character will be a calm and stoic knight who's also kind of a goofball on occasion, and definitely an idiot when it comes to emotional intelligence, but very good at puzzle solving. His arc revolves around wanting to prove himself while also kind of having some imposter syndrome about being on such a crazy adventure with the princess in the first place. Zelda's character is a very wise leader who prefers diplomacy, but is insistent on being on the front lines when violence breaks out. She's not great at combat, but thanks to her being a descendant of the goddess Hylia, she's able to use light magic. However, she's not always great at controlling these powers. Her aim is very off. Her arc revolves around wanting to get better at the combat side of things so that Link doesn't always have to do all the work. Both of these characters should be around their late teens or early 20s when it comes to their age. They shouldn't be their really young iterations, but they also shouldn't cast any famous actors that are way too old to play them either. Then there's the main villain, Ganondorf. Since this is the first movie, it makes sense to explore his origins as the king of the Gerudo, instead of introducing him to us in beast form. However, we'll see him pull out the beast form in his final fight, and he'll also use it for a majority of this movie's sequel if that happens. In most Zelda games, Ganondorf is utterly consumed by a lust for power, and he's basically just evil for the sake of being evil. This is, of course, because he's an incarnation of Demise's hatred, but none of the games ever mention that. So, for this movie, I think it'd be good if it was made known by everyone from the start that the reason Ganondorf is like this is because of Demise's curse. Maybe in this world there could have even been other Demise incarnations before Ganondorf, and this wouldn't be Hyrule's first rodeo. And that brings me to the next character, Demise. This character wouldn't really be present in the first movie they make outside of his influence in the form of his curse, but I think it would be smart to tease him in the post-credit scene in the first movie, with him then becoming the overarching villain of the trilogy, with Ganon becoming a supporting villain to him in the later movies. Speaking of supporting villains, next up is Twin Rova, the twin witches who raised Ganondorf. These two would serve as the main supporting villains to Ganondorf alongside the other Gerudo and demon monsters that would be under his command. They probably wouldn't appear after the first movie, however. Now that we've got the two main characters and the villains out of the way, it's time for the rest of the supporting cast, aka the 6 Sages. First up is the Sage of Spirit, Impa, Zelda's attendant. Not much to say about her, except that normally she's the Sage of Shadow, but I decided to change it for reasons that will be evident shortly. Then there's the Sage of the Forest, Saria, Link's childhood best friend in Kokiri Forest. Link's since grown up and moved out of Kokiri Forest, but he and Saria remain friends despite the fact that Saria, being a Kokiri, doesn't age. While they're not a sage, I feel like that while I'm in Kokiri Forest, I should also mention the Great Deku Tree. As they were in Ocarina of Time, the Great Deku Tree is the guardian and overseer of Kokiri Forest. Up next is the Sage of Fire, Darunia, the Goron Sage. Link meets him when he goes up to Death Mountain. Then for the Sage of Water, it's Sidon's time to shine. I decided to use him instead of Ruto because of how popular of a character Sidon has become as of late. Also, Ruto makes me uncomfortable. Sidon probably won't really know Link that well in this movie, but they'd undoubtedly be best friends by the time the sequel comes around. Sage number 5, the Sage of Time, would be Sahasrara, I don't know how to pronounce that, from A Link to the Past. He only functions as an elder in that game and not a sage, but I think it would work well for him here. Sage number 6 would be a completely new original character, whose role in the story would be quite different from the other sages. I'll introduce them more thoroughly once I get into the nitty-gritty of this movie's plot, but for now, just know that their title is the Sage of Darkness. This character is the reason I had Impa be the Sage of Spirit instead of Shadow, since there's a bit too much overlap between that and Darkness. Then there's the 7th Sage, who we all know is none other than Zelda herself, the Sage of Light. Then, for this movie's final character, we have to mention the King of Hyrule. He's smart and he's a benevolent ruler, but he's also very arrogant and not very receptive to advice. Now that I've run through the characters, I believe it's finally time for us to cover this movie's plot. And hold on to your horses, because it's time for us to cover the greatest high fantasy epic the world has seen since the release of Honor Among Thieves, which only came out a year ago, but I digress, it was a really good movie. The movie starts with Saria chilling in Link's house, helping him study Hyrule's history so he can pass an entry exam to be able to become a knight in Hyrule's royal army. This functions as an exposition dump so we can learn the important parts of Hyrule history, aka the events of Skyward Sword. The 3 golden goddesses created the world, created the Triforce, gave it to the goddess Hylia, and dipped. Then Demise tried to steal the Triforce from Hylia, so Hylia reincarnated herself as a mortal so that she could use the Triforce, and then she wished on it to erase Demise from existence because he was causing a lot of trouble. In his final moments, Demise unleashed a curse that would cause Hylia's bloodline to be constantly under attack by incarnations of Demise's hatred. Every major Zelda villain, except for Ganon, Twin Rova, and Girahim, saving him for the sequel, would be cited as incarnations of Demise that has attacked Hyrule before. Additionally, it's said that you can identify someone inflicted with Demise's curse by the color of their eyes. If their pupils are blood red, then they're one of the curse's demons. After the whole debacle with Demise was sorted, the Triforce was locked away in the Sacred Realm, where it remains to this day. Link barely passes his entry exam, but crushes the test of skill they have him take, and he's sworn into the Royal Knights of Hyrule. His first mission is to take part in a raid on a thieves' camp in the desert, where a large group of Gerudo thieves have been hiding out and using it as a base of operations. The soldiers enter the desert through the Gerudo Valley, but end up getting ambushed by the Gerudo and are forced to surrender. They're confronted by the leader of the Gerudo, a man named Ganondorf, whose face is obscured by a mask. Ganondorf and the captain of the soldiers enter into negotiations, where Ganondorf explains that the Gerudo are forced to live this life of thievery because of the horrible conditions and inhospitality of the desert. This issue doesn't really give them any other ways to sustain themselves. The captain of the guard assures Ganondorf that he'll put in a word for the king about swearing the Gerudo into the kingdom of Hyrule and finding them a better place to live within the kingdom's borders. Ganondorf agrees to this and lets the soldiers go free. However, as they're leaving, Link looks back and notices that while Ganondorf is briefing his own Gerudo troops about the matter at hand, he removes his mask, and Link gets a good look at Ganondorf's face, and realizes that he has blood-red eyes. Dun dun dun! Meaning Ganondorf is an incarnation of Demise's curse, and this agreement he made with the captain about joining Hyrule must be a ploy for some malevolent purpose. Link immediately goes up to his captain to tell him about this, but since Link's just a rookie, the captain shrugs him off and tells him to get back into his squad before Link can tell him about Ganondorf. Once Link gets back home, he immediately goes to Saria and tells her what he saw. The two of them spend some time freaking out, but eventually they finish and Saria tells Link to send his report straight to the top and tell Princess Zelda about his discovery. Link confronts Zelda after she gives a speech to the people. Zelda's guards try to stop Link from meeting with her, but then Zelda tells her guards to let Link through, as she's seen him in a dream she had the night prior. Link tells Zelda about Ganondorf, and Zelda immediately tries to take this information to her father. However, the king shrugs them both off, saying that Link didn't get a good look at Ganondorf, that he was graciously accommodating to Hyrule's raiders when they attacked Gerudo Desert, and that he'll be meeting with Ganondorf to discuss the Gerudo joining Hyrule next week. Zelda asks Link how sure he was that Ganondorf had the demon eyes, and Link says that he was 100% sure. So Impa advises that the two of them go to the castle Elder Sahasrahla, still don't know how to pronounce that, for advice. Sahasrahla is deeply troubled about the news that there is a new incarnation of Demise's curse on the loose, and that the king seems to be brushing it off. He tells Link and Zelda that to be able to handle this without the backing of the kingdom, they'll need the Master Sword, an artifact that was created centuries ago with the express purpose of slaying demons like Ganondorf. This sword can be found in the Temple of Time, which is also where the 6 sages guard the entrance to the Sacred Realm. Link and Zelda then go to the Temple of Time, where they meet these sages. They aren't the same sages I spoke of before when discussing characters. Those ones will take their places in time. These are all different sages, though they're all the same races as the ones I spoke of previously. These sages tell Link and Zelda that to pull free the Master Sword, they must first obtain the 3 spiritual stones. The first spiritual stone, aka the Kokiri Emerald, can be found in the possession of the Great Deku Tree. Link grew up in Kokiri Forest, so it shouldn't be hard for him to explain the situation to the Great Deku Tree and get that spiritual stone. Next is the Zora Sapphire, which again shouldn't be hard to obtain. Zelda's a member of the royal family, and the Zora are very close with the royal family, so Zelda should be able to go over to Zora's domain, explain the situation, and they'll give her the Zora Sapphire. The last one, however, the Goron Ruby, won't be so easy. It can be found in Goron City, which is at the peak of Death Mountain. Considering how it has death in the name, Link is understandably intimidated by this prospect. Regardless, they must go onward with this plan. Zelda pays a visit to Zora's domain and meets up with Sidon, who agrees to give Zelda the Zora Sapphire, and Link pays a visit to the Great Deku Tree, who can sense the evil coming from Gerudo Desert, and gives Link the Kokiri Emerald. Zelda then works on trying to talk her father out of allowing Ganondorf to join the kingdom, who isn't hearing any of it, while Link hikes up the treacherous Death Mountain, nearly dying a few times along the way, and reaches Goron City. He explains the situation to Big Brother Darunia, the leader of the Gorons. Darunia is reluctant to trust Link, so he offers Link a deal. The cavern that contains the Goron's main food supply has been overtaken by Dodongos, and if Link can drive those Dodongos out, then Darunia will offer Link the Goron Ruby. Enter the first dungeon of the movie, where we see Link making his way through Dodongo's cavern, slowly figuring out how to get through closed-off walls, and driving out Dodongos using outside-the-box thinking and occasional sword swinging. Then, once he's done with that, we see Link face off against the King Dodongo. There's a big but brief epic fight that ends with Link feeding the King Dodongo a bomb flower and killing it. Darunia is very grateful and hands over the Goron Ruby. Link returns with the final spiritual stone only a few hours before Ganondorf is set to meet with the King of Hyrule. Since Ganondorf won't be able to meet with the king for very long before being asked to remove his mask and reveal his eyes, they figure that Ganondorf intends to execute his plan when he meets with the king. Link and Zelda both go into the Temple of Time, and Link pulls free the Master Sword, becoming the chosen hero. meaning that he's now powerful enough to face Ganondorf before it's too late. But right after Link pulls free the sword, Link and Zelda both hear a horse galloping heading towards the castle. They run out of the Temple of Time to see Ganondorf's early. The two start rushing towards the castle, hoping they can make it there in time. Ganondorf, the Twin Witches, and two other Gerudo guards meet with the king in the throne room. The king comments on how Ganondorf's early, and Ganondorf responds with a vague comment about wanting to surprise him. The king's confused, but agrees to have his meeting with Ganondorf early. He starts by asking Ganondorf to remove his mask, and Ganondorf obliges, revealing his blood-red eyes. The king is given a quick moment of realization before the Twin Witches do their work, and dispatch all the guards in the throne room with ease. Suddenly, the castle comes under attack by an army of Gerudo who are hiding in the brush waiting for Ganondorf to make his move on the king. With all the guards in the castle fending off the attack and all the throne room guards down, there's no one stopping Ganondorf from seizing the king from his chair and taking him captive. Ganondorf remounts his horse and takes the king to the Temple of Time, where they pass Link and Zelda on their way to the castle, who are forced to turn around and start heading toward the temple again. Ganondorf takes the king into the Temple of Time with a knife to his throat and tells the 6 sages to allow him passage into the Sacred Realm or he'll kill the king. The 6 sages oblige and open the gateway, only to watch Ganondorf kill the king anyway. This happens right as Link and Zelda arrive back at the Temple of Time, and Zelda watches as her father falls to the ground. She runs over to him and holds her dead father, while Link rushes Ganondorf in a fit of rage. Ganondorf easily parries Link's blow, and one blast of magic from the Twin Witches has Link incapacitated. Ganondorf takes the Twin Witches along with a small group of other Gerudo and passes through into the Sacred Realm. The 6 sages also follow through the gateway in an attempt to stop him, but they're too late. He arrives before the Triforce and lays his hand upon it to make his wish. Now, so far, this story has been pretty similar to that of Ocarina of Time, aside from having both Zelda and Ganondorf play a far more active role up to this point. However, that's all about to change, for when Ganondorf lays his hands upon the Triforce, it doesn't split into 3 upon seeing the imbalance in his heart. Instead, it allows him to make his wish, and Ganondorf's wish is to rule the world. Upon making this wish, the gate to the Sacred Realm closes and suddenly disappears. Both Impa and Sahasrara made it to the Temple of Time around this point and saw his wish, and neither of them understand what happened. Link, Zelda, Impa, and Sahasrara reconvene and discuss what happened. No one quite understands why the entrance to the Sacred Realm disappears, or why Ganondorf isn't ruling the world right now despite his wish, but Sahasrara says their best bet of finding it out is to open a new gate to the Sacred Realm. For this, they'll need 6 new sages, and for that to happen they need people who are descended from the original ancient sages who built the Temple of Time. Luckily, both Impa and Sahasrara are descended from the sages, but that still leaves 4 more. After some research, they found out that the leader of Goron City, Big Brother Darunia, was chosen as leader due to being a descendant of the original Goron Sage. And they also found out that Sidon was actually the current Zora Sage's brother. They sent messenger birds to both Zora's Domain and Death Mountain, calling both Darunia and Sidon to Hyrule Castle. The two arrive, and Link briefly hits it off with Sidon before everyone snaps him out of it and they get back to work. While they were researching to find out who's fit to become the new sages, Zelda finds Saria eavesdropping on them. Saria gets told off by Impa at first while Link tries to defend her, but then Saria brings up how since the Kokiri never age, most of them are related in one way or another. Ergo, she's related to the ancient Kokiri Sage, ergo, she's fit to become the new Kokiri Sage. With all 5 new sages accounted for, Zelda brings them all to a secret vault her father showed her, which contains secret stones. These stones were gifted to the Hyrule royal family by an ancient race, and they contain the power to amplify someone's abilities. Zelda distributes the secret stones among all 5 of them, but then Sahasrara asks her about finding the 6th sage. They have 0 leads on finding a replacement for sage number 6, since all their research says that the ancient 6 sage's bloodline only led to 1 modern descendant, being the original sage who was in the Sacred Realm when it was closed off. Because of this, Zelda has opted to use her powers as a descendant of the goddess to take the place of the 6th sage and help open the door to the Sacred Realm. The 5 new sages, along with Zelda and Link, all meet up in the Temple of Time. Due to their improvised setup and inexperienced sages, plus the fact that they only have 5 plus Zelda, they'll only be able to send 2 people to the Sacred Realm. It's disputed on whether they should send Link or give the Master Sword to someone else who's more experienced, but after realizing that the Master Sword refuses to work with anyone besides Link, they decide to send Link through. After some heated debate, Zelda eventually convinces everyone to let her be the second person to enter through. She's got light powers, she wants to avenge her father, and it's her responsibility to protect the kingdom as its active ruling monarch. Zelda and the sages use all their strength and open a small gateway to the Sacred Realm. Link and Zelda rush through and barely make it through before the gateway closes. Once they pass through, they land somewhere they did not expect. Instead of falling into a spiritual holy land like they were expecting, they instead land in what looks to be the Temple of Time again. Except, it seems different somehow. No one else is here, and the temple seems to be falling apart, looking extremely damaged. Zelda notices a strange color through the hole in the roof, and runs outside to find the sky is completely red. Link and Zelda look around and see a landscape that looks like the Kingdom of Hyrule, but is different somehow. It looks like the kingdom if it had fallen into complete and utter disarray. Why have they arrived here instead of the Sacred Realm? Well, Zelda quickly figures it out. This is the Sacred Realm. Ganondorf made a wish on the Triforce to rule the world, but when he made that wish, he wasn't in the world he was thinking of. He was in the Sacred Realm. However, he was still picturing the world Hyrule was in when he made that wish, causing the Sacred Realm to reform itself into a mirror image of Hyrule and making him the ruler of that world. Meaning at this point, we're switching gears from an Ocarina of Time type plot to a Link to the Past type plot, as Link and Zelda have to traverse the Dark World, find Ganondorf, and defeat him. So after Zelda figures out exactly why the Sacred Realm turned into an evil version of Hyrule, Link and Zelda run into a bunch of monsters populating the ruins of this world's Hyrule Castle. They all seem to be the products of demon magic, and are therefore weak to the Master Sword, but there's still too many of them, so Link and Zelda opt to retreat. They set up camp in Hyrule Field in the general vicinity of Zora's Domain. Zelda spends some time practicing using her light magic, and while she's doing this, Link notices a massive tower at the peak of Death Mountain that wasn't in the Light World. The two figure that it's probably where Ganon's taken residence. Link groans about how climbing the Light World version of Death Mountain was hard enough, but Zelda cuts him off when she spots something moving in the caves where Zora's Domain sits. She's worried that it might be a monster that plans to report their presence here to Ganondorf, so she and Link follow it. What they find, however, is nothing of the sort. The two enter Zora's Domain and find it to be completely dried up. Link spots the creature as it moves through the tunnels, and he notices it appears to be floating. It looks more like some kind of specter than a demon monster. Link and Zelda catch up to it, and they find what looks like one of the sages. It's impossible to tell which sage it is, though. It looks like a mix between all 6 of them. This mysterious sage tells Link and Zelda that they're actually a mix of the spirit and power of all the 6 sages, combined into one being. Once the Sacred Realm turned into the Dark World, Ganon's evil magic flooded against the sages, and mostly destroyed each of them, but the sacred power of what remained within each sage had them combined into one entity so they could survive. With what was left of their power, they removed the gate to the Sacred Realm so that Ganon would be stuck. Combined, they have no name other than the Sage of Darkness. The Sage of Darkness tells Link and Zelda that they won't be able to breach Ganon's tower at their current strength. He says in order to find what they need, they'll need to consult a great fairy who resided in the Sacred Realm and was imprisoned by Ganondorf after his takeover, along with all the other divine beings who lived in the Sacred Realm. Ganon's prison for these beings is located in a massive pyramid that exists in the Dark World equivalent of the Gerudo Desert. After providing this information, the Sage of Darkness vanishes. Link questions whether or not they can trust this mysterious sage, or if this is a trap set by Ganon, but Zelda senses divine power coming off of this sage and believes that this is legit. So they head back over their camp to start packing up to start heading towards Gerudo Desert. However, after being wrong about the Sage of Darkness being a scout for Ganon, Link and Zelda seem to have let their guard down and allowed an actual scout to spot them. The Gerudo scout sees the two of them packing up and heading towards the Gerudo Desert, and returns up Death Mountain into Ganondorf's tower. There, they kneel before Ganondorf's throne, and we finally get to see Ganondorf for the first time since he made his wish on the Triforce. He looks a lot bigger, cockier, and much more powerful. After the scout tells him of Link and Zelda, Ganondorf figures that they might have encountered what was left of the original 6 sages, aka the Sage of Darkness, so it would be smart to use them to find the Sage of Darkness. He can't actually leave the Sacred Realm without the 6 sages, so he sends the Twin Witches out to follow Link and Zelda until the Sage of Darkness hopefully shows face. After the Twin Witches are gone, one of the remaining Gerudo who came with Ganon to the Sacred Realm starts to question Ganondorf's command. The Gerudo agreed to him still being their chief despite being a demonic incarnation, because they believed his additional power from his demon magic could be used to help the Gerudo achieve better living conditions than a life of thievery in a harsh desert. But so far, all he's done with his command is betray the kingdom after they agreed to help the Gerudo, all so he could wish for world domination. Now, he and a small portion of his forces are trapped in this cruel replica of Hyrule, while most of the other Gerudo back on the material plane must have been captured. The Gerudo with Ganondorf still backed him at first, hoping he'd work towards getting them home, But with how much he's focused on corrupting the Sacred Realm and dominating the material plane once they get back, everyone starts to worry that this may not turn out well for them. After this, Gerudo voices their complaints. Ganondorf promptly kills her. Foolish of them to think that a demonic incarnation would care about their best interests, or use them as anything but a means to an end. But now that he has an entire new world under his command, he'll no longer need the Gerudo if they dare to question him. After this first Gerudo is killed, the other Gerudo quickly go to arms and start trying to take down Ganondorf, but Ganondorf's power has simply grown too strong. After defeating 3 more Gerudo, one of them slings an arrow and shoots Ganondorf right in the chest. Ganondorf laughs it off and pulls the arrow out, saying how it's foolish of her to think that such a measly weapon could hurt him while he has the power of the Triforce. He then holds out his hand and reveals the Triforce of Power before using it to mutate into his beast form, Ganon. The camera looks away as Ganon ravages through the remaining Gerudo in a fashion so brutal that it cannot be shown on screen without bumping up the age rating. The camera pans back over to Ganondorf having transformed back into a man, standing over a bunch of dead Gerudo. His original army is now gone, but it matters not. In this new world, an army of demon monsters sits ready at his disposal. Also, the scene serves as a sort of Chekhov's gun for Ganondorf's beast form, for when he busts it out in the final battle. Cut back to Link and Zelda traveling across Hyrule towards the desert. While they're on their way, Zelda has a thought. Throughout Hyrule's past, incarnations of Demise's curse have appeared anywhere from a month apart to centuries apart, but there's never been more than one at once. Even during the blights of some of the demonic incarnations that lived for centuries, there was never more than one at the same time. This means there's a very good chance that there only can be one at once. So theoretically, once they remove Ganondorf's power over to the Sacred Realm, and once they manage to get back to the material plane, they may be able to use the power of the sages to seal the exit to the Sacred Realm again, and instead of killing Ganondorf, they could keep him alive, suspended in the Sacred Realm for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. If they succeed in doing this, then that's thousands of years that the kingdom goes without being under threat from incarnations of Demise's curse. Link and Zelda agree to consult the Sage of Darkness about this plan the next time they run into him. But first, they'll need to pay a visit to Ganondorf's prison. And it just so happens that they've arrived at the Gerudo Desert. If the Gerudo Desert in Hyrule was inhospitable, then the Gerudo Desert in the Dark World is inhospitable squared. Constant sandstorms everywhere, along with wild demonic beasts hiding behind every nook and cranny. Link and Zelda are narrowly able to make their way through the sandstorm while fighting off the monsters, and are about to declare themselves lost in the storm when they bump up against the edge of the pyramid they were looking for. The two loop around the edges of the pyramid until they find the entrance and finally manage to reach a reprieve from the harsh sandstorm. Enter the second dungeon that's covered in this movie, the Pyramid. The first dungeon, Dodongo's Cavern, more resembled a series of obstacles that Link had to overcome, while this dungeon is more like what you've seen in an Indiana Jones movie. There's still monsters guarding the prison, of course, but for the most part, Link and Zelda spend their time here trying to decipher puzzles in order to open doors, until eventually they find a big key there that they can take all the way back to the first room in the pyramid and unlock the door to the cell block. There, they'll dispatch a few guards and find prison cells filled with many sacred beings who live within the Sacred Realm. Link and Zelda work on freeing each of them until they arrive at the Great Fairy. The Great Fairy looks at Link and Zelda and immediately can tell that there's something divine about these two. Link and Zelda explain to the Great Fairy what happened. Link finding out about Ganondorf, Ganon's raid on the Sacred Realm, the Triforce Wish, all the way up to the Sage of Darkness telling them to find the fairy. Upon mentioning the Sage of Darkness, we get a glimpse of the twin witches who are eavesdropping on this conversation, as per Ganon's orders. Link and Zelda ask the Great Fairy about what power she can offer them to be able to face Ganondorf while he has the full Triforce, but the Great Fairy responds by telling them that Ganondorf doesn't have the full Triforce anymore. The fairy explains that after someone wishes upon the Triforce, it will be split into 3 pieces upon the wish's completion, these pieces being the Triforce of Wisdom, Courage, and Power respectively. The piece that most represents the person who made the wish, in this case the Triforce of Power, will go to the person who made the wish, while the other 2 pieces go to the people who best represent the other 2 virtues of the Triforce. And the Great Fairy now understands why she got a divine sense from Link and Zelda. Link was the hero chosen to wield the freaking Master Sword, and his actions throughout the movie have been ridiculously brave. Naturally, there'd be none more courageous than him. Zelda is the descendant of the goddess Hylia herself, and she believed Link about Ganon when no one else did. Naturally, there is no one wiser than her. The fairy could sense it. They're the bearers of the other pieces of the Triforce. They just didn't realize it. And upon realizing it, The crests of the other Triforce pieces appear in their hands. Now that they know that they bear the other pieces of the Triforce, they're now plenty powerful enough to face Ganondorf. However, upon realizing that Link and Zelda are the bearers of the other Triforce pieces, the Twin Witches reveal themselves. Sure, their orders were to hold off until the Sage of Darkness revealed themselves, but the other pieces of the Triforce, that's a way better catch. Link and Zelda enter into a close quarters battle against Twinrova in the cell block, which ends in Zelda finally aiming a light blast successfully and taking down Twinrova. Link and Zelda free the Great Fairy and are finally able to leave the Gerudo Desert. Shortly after leaving, they run into the Sage of Darkness again, who is surprised to hear that Link and Zelda bear the other Triforce pieces. Zelda asks the Sage of Darkness to use their power to let Zelda talk to the other sages in the Light World. After the Sage of Darkness finishes making this communication line, and Zelda can talk to everyone, she briefs all the sages on her plan to keep Ganondorf suspended in the Sacred Realm. Everyone understands their plan, and they're all ready to open a gateway for Link and Zelda to pass through back to the Light World. Everyone understands this plan, and they're all ready to open a gateway for Link and Zelda to pass back through the Light World. Link and Zelda start heading towards Death Mountain, but first they make a pit stop at the remains of Dark Hyrule Castle. Zelda believes that it's possible that specific smaller objects may have been copied over along with the rest of Hyrule, and she ends up being completely right. Zelda comes across the Dark World version of her old training bow she'd used for archery back in the day. Zelda's aim with her Light Blast is still less than stellar, but she thinks that if she channels her attack through the bow, which she's an expert with, then she might be able to hit her shots better. So she empowers the bow with her light powers and transforms it into the Bow of Light. From there, Link and Zelda make their way to Death Mountain. Once they arrive, it's an even more treacherous climb than the one Link went through in the Light World, and at the mountain summit they find Ganon's Tower sitting where Goron City was in Hyrule. Ganon's Tower functions as the third and final dungeon in this movie, and it's a very brief one. The first one was more of an obstacle course for Link, while the second one was a big puzzle that Link and Zelda had to crack, but this one is the Gauntlet. Big hordes of enemies and booby traps lying in wait for Link and Zelda to slay, evade, and disarm. Before long, Link and Zelda reach the top of the tower and confront Ganondorf. Despite the loss of Twinrova, Ganondorf laughs at how the two of them have made it so far, but then he senses the power of the rest of the Triforce resting within them. He laughs, and says that he's grateful for Link and Zelda returning the rest of the Triforce to him. Once the Triforce is reunited in his hands, he can wish upon it once more, and he'll make sure it gives him control over the right world this time. All he has to do is kill a couple of kids. Climax time. Link and Zelda versus Ganondorf. This fight starts out as a big sword fight between Link and Ganondorf, while Ganondorf is simultaneously trading magic shots with Zelda. It's an intense battle, but eventually Zelda gets Ganondorf off guard with a light arrow, allowing Link to jump and plunge his blade downward through Ganondorf's chest. There's a quick moment of reprieve as they realize they did it, but then Zelda starts lecturing Link about how they weren't meant to kill him, but good news for them, they didn't kill him. Ganondorf suddenly comes back alive, and the crest of the Triforce of Power appears on his hand as he starts mutating. The Master Sword shoots out of Ganondorf's chest and back to Link's feet as Ganondorf completes his mutation into the Dark Beast, Ganon. Link and Zelda are now quickly put on the defensive as Ganon starts tearing apart the room, trying to destroy the two of them. Before long, the entire throne room has been torn to shreds and goes from being a penthouse to being a roof as the walls and ceiling are torn away. Link and Zelda are forced to retreat back down the tower as Ganon increases his power levels even more and starts tearing apart entire levels of the tower like a vertical bulldozer. Link and Zelda eventually retreat back down to the bottom of the tower, and as Ganon pursues them through the collapsing building, Zelda delivers one final shot with the light bow right into Ganon's face, blasting him back and preventing him from leaving the collapsing tower. The entire building crumbles, and all the rubble lands right on top of Ganon. Ganon is very powerful, so this doesn't quite manage to kill him. However, it does take away the last of his strength and his hold on the Sacred Realm. Ganon transforms back into Ganondorf, unable to stand, and all around them, Link and Zelda can see the landscape of Ganon's Dark World fading away and transforming back into the Sacred Realm. Zelda calls upon the six sages, who reopen the gate to the Sacred Realm one last time. Link and Zelda run through the gate, and the extremely wounded Ganondorf tries to pursue. However, at that point when Link and Zelda make their way through the gateway, the six sages direct their attention to Ganondorf, using their powers to hold him in place. While they do this, Zelda uses her powers to close the gate to the Sacred Realm, which by this point has completely returned to its original state. The seal of the seven sages has been completed. Ganondorf is suspended in the Sacred Realm, and as long as his imprisonment there remains, The curse of demise will plague Hyrule no longer. Link returns the Master Sword to its pedestal, and they all leave the Temple of Time happy with a job well done. Link returns to Kokiri Forest with Saria and is hailed as a hero by everyone, while Zelda takes her throne over Hyrule and mourns her lost father. And that's the movie, or at least my ideal version of the Zelda movie. I tried to make sure it had a good amount of everything that makes this series click. Plenty of traveling across the fields of Hyrule, with there also being frequent visits to key regions. A good amount of time spent in dungeons, but only as much as would work in the setting of a movie. It contains lots of lore and plot points from the Zelda games of old, while also spicing it up with brand new concepts and transforming the old concepts to work in a movie setting. I don't know if this will be anything like what the real Zelda movie ends up being. I wrote this using the knowledge from all the high fantasy content I've consumed over the years as a base, but the movie's director said it would be like a live-action Miyazaki movie instead of something like Lord of the Rings. Studio Ghibli movies aren't something I'm familiar with, though I'm sure many of these ideas could work in either style. But for the sake of knowing what the fuck I'm talking about, I probably should watch one. So, if you don't mind me, I'm gonna watch Spirited Away real quick. Fuck was that? Personally, even though there's a lot of pessimists out there, I have a lot of high hopes for this movie. And I suggest that you keep all your hopes high for this movie as well, as it would give Nintendo an incentive to not fuck this up. The movie's post-credit scene shows Ganondorf suspended in place in the Sacred Realm, when he hears a voice.
Ganondorf, former king of the Gerudo, latest incarnation of my hatred. The people of Hyrule chose to let you live in order to keep me at bay. That was a grave mistake.
Thank you all for watching!